The Sound Off Podcast. The podcast about broadcast with Matt Kundle. Starts now.
This week, we're going to be talking a little bit about country music in Canada. And we're going to do it with Jenn Dalen-Gordon, who's the operations manager for the BC Interior stations for Stingray Radio. You're about to hear the story of someone who grew up listening and loving country music. Her first job was typing in all the metadata to a brand new country radio station. And then she became a program director at the age of 24. Country music radio is popular in Canada. Just about every market except Montreal has a country music station that performs reliably. And Jenn oversees a lot of radio stations in Stingray's country networks. Jenn Dalen-Gordon joins me from the Stingray offices in Kamloops, British Columbia, the home of New Country 103.1.
Tell me about your SAIT experience, because Professor Strobent speaks very highly of you.
I loved SAIT. I actually am pretty convinced that if I didn't go to SAIT, I don't think I would be, one, where I am, or two, maybe even still in radio. Like, it's one of those experiences where it probably hinges so much on the instructors, because I had Richard Beasley, Steve Olson, and Louise Leduc at the time. And everything they, instilled in me in terms of like the work ethic and stuff was instrumental. And we flash forward, I've been out of there for over a decade and I can call and text Richard about anything, right? So if I have a problem or I'm trying to work through something, I can call him. He'll answer. He'll tell me the truth, the hard truth sometimes, or he'll make me feel really good about myself. So it works both ways.
Tell me one piece of advice that he gave you that's instrumental.
I'm only laughing, Matt, because I don't know if you know, it's almost like a cultish thing that exists with SAIT grads. Do you know about his wristbands that he gives to people, like the old Live Strong bands? They're blue, and across the band it says, "How bad do you want it?" And he basically lives and breathes and dies by that saying. And everything we would do in class, outside of class, since I graduated, it's, how bad do you want this? Like, do you actually want to do this? Because as we all know, this is not easy. I don't think there's anything really easy about the day-to-day of radio. And so how bad do you want to do this? And every time I'm having a challenge or going through something, I'm like, well, how bad do I actually want this? Do I want to go do something else that's not as fun, doesn't offer as cool experiences, or do I really want to keep doing this?
You went to the University of Calgary. You got a Bachelor of Communications.
I did.
So what's that in-between period where you graduate and then you go to SAIT? Did you not think that the Bachelor of Communications would get you the radio gig?
Great question. And at the time, I was 18, right? So I went straight out of high school, did the thing where you go to university, had a literal 18-year-old mental breakdown in a statistics class, learning about the Poisson theory, going, I don't want to do this. I was going into business. And then that's where I found the communications lane and went, oh, that sounds kind of more interesting. And then I'm the typical radio person. I'm a huge lover of music. So then kind of went down the volunteer route and I started volunteering at CJSW, which is the campus radio station at the University of Calgary. And I fell in love with that. And then I went, oh, how do I do this for real? And really the reason why I went U of C and SAIT was because I came to the realization that you could do both. Like, they offer that program, right, where you can do 2 years at the University of Calgary, you can do 2 years at SAIT, and then you wind up with a diploma in radio broadcasting, and you wind up with a communications degree. And guess what? You get 2, and you only have 4 years, and you can do it like 2 for the price of 1, basically, which is honestly the only reason I did it.
Is it safe to say you were raised on Country 105?
Yeah. I grew up in Calgary, born and raised, Country 105, listened to that station. Growing up, of course, absolutely listened to other stations. My mom is more of a classic rock fan. So classic rock, classic hits, like she's Elton John, Fleetwood Mac, all those types of artists. But Country 105, all my friends, like that was what we thought were so cool. We'd get in the car when we turned 16 and turn on 105 and go cruising like you do, like 16-year-olds. Then eventually when we got to be adults, you enter the bar scene and we got to go to Ranchman's and live our best lives at the Calgary Stampede and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I was raised on 105.
So what's in your CD collection that is not country?
Fleetwood Mac. I'm a huge Fleetwood Mac fan. I'm also a 90s kid, so there is Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears and NSYNC all those boy bands and pop stars of that era. And then I'm one of these weird people too, where my music, choices are so broad. So then I go into like the gym and work out, and I need like heavy metal, like loud type music to run on a treadmill. I'm like, let's do some Metallica, Rob Zombie, let's put on some old school Nickelback, like when they actually were rockers and like that type of a thing. So my music collection is very diverse.
Yeah, I can see you working out to Living Dead Girl.
Yeah, and just cranking it up on the treadmill and the weights, lifting heavy and grunting in the back. That's I'm that person. Maybe
some Korn.
Oh, 100%. Like that's just real loud in my headphones, or if I'm at a gym and, they put on a playlist, I'm like, please pick some like good rock and roll.
Tell me about your placement after you graduated from SAIT.
So I was working part-time with Golden West. So I because I ended up when I graduated from SAIT, I actually had 2 university classes that I had to finish. And it's funny, Matt, because I actually went, I'm not going to do them. I'm just going to, whatever, I don't need this. I'm going to go into radio. I was so hungry to get working full time in radio. But Steve Olson actually sat me down and said, you are 2 courses away from your degree. At this point, like, just finish it. Just like be done with it. And long-term, like short-term pain, long-term gain, radio will still be here when you finish your 2 courses in like 3 to 4 months, because I did them kind of during summer and online. So I was working part-time with Golden West, and they had me, I was the cruiser kid. I would do on-air shifts. I, at one point, sat at the front desk because I just wanted to be around a radio station. And then I did a little bit of traffic with that. And then once I graduated from the U of C, I needed a full-time radio job. And at the time, they didn't have a position. So I, like every other kid, went on the hunt. And so I ended up getting a call from, at the time, Mike McGuire was working up just south of the Edmonton area in Leduc. And they were getting set to launch a brand new radio station. It was country, which again, I grew up in 105. I love country music. So I'm like, this is awesome. And so I ended up applying for the position, which at the time was a on-air position and some music role. And I got the gig, which was super exciting. And so I moved up to Leduc, Alberta. And I truly believe that experience of launching a radio station with an independent company has got me to where I am, because we had to start from the literal ground up. Like, it's not like when you join a radio station with a major company where they have a music library that they can just import into their market and it has EOM set and intros. Like my first day, I sat in the production studio and I set EOMs on like 400 songs because we had a music library and we had to put it in the system. Like there was no system. And then we had to build the traffic database. Guess what? I had done natural log at SAIT. So I got on the phone with a lovely lady, and I think she was in Texas on the helpline. Mary was her name. And Mary became my best friend for like 3 weeks, where every day I would call her and we would build traffic clocks. Like I had to build them from scratch, and we had to create accounts. Like we had nothing. And then I would go and we sit with Mike and we would literally build the music master, like, build the clocks, build the coding, everything. And so I was just this bright-eyed, fresh graduated, super excited to do radio kid who just got to absorb like literally every component that you needed to build a radio station from the ground up. And so it was an interesting experience, but I got to do it, kind of got to dabble into everything, which I think if I look back at where I am now and some of the things I'm doing now, I'm like, oh, like that really made an impact, because I'm a big believer that to get to the next level, you have to understand the foundational building blocks. And so that's what I got to do there, which was instrumental.
I mean, it's an incredible story, having to put in all those end of time markers, and then you're on the phone with Music Master. And I think I began to have a little bit of a mental twitch in my head, just hearing about all the shock and awe, because you can't import that stuff. You do have to put it in. And so there's 2 things I do want to unpack, though, here. And the first one is, tell me about the one. Its placement. It's in Leduc. Leduc is close to the airport in Edmonton. And then it's country. And does it get into Edmonton? And was it treated as a rural station?
It was treated as a Leduc radio station. And we had to, because you look at, like, as we all know, and the Edmonton market's crazy. I think I've lost track as to how many radio stations are in Edmonton. I mean, like there's so many stations, and, getting the license for that radio station was, as everybody knew, a challenge because of the proximity to Edmonton. And for a lot of people, it is funny when you fly into the city of Edmonton, you don't fly into Edmonton. You fly into Leduc County. And that's where the airport is, right? And so it's 30 minutes to, as Edmonton continues to sprawl and grow, I think it's getting closer at this point. And so it was interesting because you have this little community just outside this big city. And we really had to lean into the Leduc angle. That was the thing, is like, we were here, there, and everywhere. Like I was every single weekend at an event, doing remotes, being the boots on the ground, the faces, of the radio station. Because if we didn't do that, then what was the appeal? Because you have up the road major market talent, major market radio stations, big contests. Like, there was no other way to do it. So it was a lot of, almost like guerrilla style marketing around the city. We had all these lawn signs that we got printed, and then we would, go to an event to just litter, like we're going to put 50 down the road leading into this little event, because we want people to know who we are and that we're here, right? So in that sense, it was kind of fun because I'm, again, a young kid. At the time I wasn't married. I didn't, I could spend my weekends doing work. It didn't bother me. So I would go to all these things. But we really did have to work that angle, right? Because you're right outside a big city. Now, we ended up with access to some big city talent. That definitely did help draw some attraction and attention to the radio station. There had been some changes in the Edmonton market at the time. I mean, that was how we got some high caliber talent right out of the gate. So it really made a voice when it launched. Obviously, there's changes and stuff that all happen in this business, as we know, and, people moved on and whatnot. But at the same time, we came out of the gate pretty hard, which was great. And then, all this is going on. And meanwhile, they'd applied for a radio station in Stony Plain area, right? So now we are the south of the city, and now they're looking at a radio station basically to the other side, right? And we ended up getting that in my time there. So that was one of the last things I did with them, was launch that. In fact, this kind of funny story that I don't know if a ton of people know, but the day we launched 88.1, I got the call to come to Red Deer. So put the station on the air. And what kind of happened is, actually, it was Richard Strobant who called me, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I was in a hotel room, and I said, "Well, I'm in a hotel. I'm about to lie in bed and eat a Subway sandwich. And then I'm going to take like an 18-hour nap," because as we all know, when you launch a radio station, it's really hectic and busy. And especially that, those last 48 hours before you hit the switch, and you don't realize how stressed you are because you're just hoping that this thing goes on the air. And when it goes on, it doesn't sound like a disaster. And so I was coming down from the high of that, and that's when I got the call, essentially, that I was going to be called about a position in Red Deer. So the whole thing was a bit of a whirlwind. But again, the one advantage we had when we launched 88.1, and again, we didn't have this with Leduc, is now we had a model. So we had, we could just transfer a music library, and we could just kind of copy a music master database and traffic clocks. And we had a model for how we wanted to attack the actual little community side of it, where, we would be lots of places and some of that guerrilla style stuff. But it was still a whirlwind, that's for sure.
So the other thing I wanted to unpack was your time at Golden West. We don't often have people from that company on this show, or at least who have worked there. Shout out to Doug Anderson, by the way, who speaks very highly of you.
Doug is great, yeah.
The company's based out of Steinbach, which is not too far from me, but it's unique. And so what were your takeaways?
I think there was a couple things that helped when I got into the Leduc market, because as we, for those who know Golden West, their approach is very local. It's almost like the hyper-local focus. They're in markets. It's kind of funny because they're in some of their markets surround big cities. Like if you look at the city of Calgary, they've got stations in Airdrie, Cochrane, Okotoks, and High River, which are all little municipalities anywhere from 20, 30, 40 some minutes outside of Calgary. So same thing. And they can get their signal a little bit into parts of Calgary, but they don't focus on Calgary, right? Their focus is those markets. So I had that experience as well, because same sort of approach. We're going to go to whatever small town rodeo it might be, or whatever parade, and we're going to be there, and we're going to have a big presence at that, because that's what we actually care about. Obviously, as we know in radio, what can happen is smaller the market. Obviously, revenue and the sales side might drive a bit more. So you might do some more sales focused promotions that you wouldn't maybe do in a major market, because that doesn't make sense for that, right? So that also taught me a lot about small market radio, which was super helpful when I got to Leduc, and then actually when I moved on with NewCap at the time, now Stingray, because I had a ton of that small market type experience. some of the fun parts, with the Golden West era was the chance to kind of do a lot of different things, because obviously we know the model of radio has changed and staffing and all this kind of stuff, but those smaller stations don't, right from the get-go, they don't really have big staffs at that point. And so that meant somebody who did the front desk also did traffic, or that somebody who was in news might also, be a reporter or might do something else at the radio station. And so that was the experience I got with Golden West, is they brought me on as a cruiser kid. That was my first job, summer in between SAIT years. I wanted to work in radio, and I could have gone into Calgary and done like a straight team job, which would have been great. But at the time, Golden West, which was a 40-minute drive from my house, was looking for a cruiser. So that meant I got to do cut-ins, which at the time I kind of wanted to be on air. So that was a huge appeal to me. So I would drive out to High River, was a country station, Sun Country 99.7 and AM 1140. And I would spend my weekends at all of these little events and rodeos and parades and stuff, getting to do cut-ins and remotes. And my first ever remote was at the Strathmore Stampede in the middle of a tornado watch. So that was super interesting. That was back when you had to do the call-ins. So I was on a phone calling into the radio station, trying not to panic because there is like this giant storm cloud right in front of me. But lots of fun experiences like that. And so, yeah, and then the summer ended, and Golden West was really good to me in that they let me stay on board. So they asked me, do you want to still do some part-time hours? And I was like, yeah. So then my second year at SAIT got kind of crazy, because what would happen was if they needed coverage on like the morning show or the drive show, I would talk to my SAIT instructors and say, hey, can I do this? Like, can we set up my school schedule so I can like come into school, do whatever I need to do at school, and then leave, go do like a 3 to 4 hour radio shift, and then, do my homework or whatnot. And they made it happen. So that was really cool. And at the time, I also, when I grew up, I swam competitively. So then when I got to post-secondary, coaching competitive swimming was how I paid for some of my tuition. So I was going to SAIT, working at Golden West part-time, coaching competitive swimming, and then I was doing an online U of C course. So it was a little bit hectic and chaotic, and I like to live my world in chaos, so it made perfect sense. But again, everybody was willing to work with me and make the scheduling work so that I could do that, get that work experience, which was so valuable, and also still graduate school and maybe get a couple hours of sleep.
And you got to go to Red Deer, you got the call to go to Red Deer, and what was that job and what'd you do?
So that was, at the time, program director of KG Country 95.5 and Southern Alberta. So at the time, Southern Alberta consisted of Q91 in Drumheller, Q1057 in Brooks, Q93.3 in Stettler, and Blairmore. So that would have been Mountain Radio at the time, and then Red Deer, KG. So for me, the big draw to that position was KG, knowing the country format. I mean, obviously, again, I grew up in 105, but by this point, I was well enough into the country format to know that when I went to the CCMA Awards, KG Country was a juggernaut of a radio station. Everybody knew what CKGY was. That year, it was Greg Shannon and Tara Lee won Personality of the Year. I think Tim Day won like Music Director of the Year, and the station won Station of the Year. And you knew it was just this heritage station. It was about 40 years old at that point. And I couldn't believe that they were going to let me be the program director. And when they hired me, I was like a 24-year-old kid, and they were going to let me come and program this juggernaut of a radio station. I still think it is an amazing radio station, and it is a special one. And so it was super, super exciting. And kind of my role was obviously PD locally in Red Deer, but then I would go around and visit the markets in Southern Alberta and, work with talent and, boots on the ground with some strategy, and then music assistants and whatnot too, and whatever else we needed to do. So that kept me busy, and I got to tour around Southern Alberta. And I can look back now and go, wow, that was a little bit insanity. I probably had no idea what I was doing in many ways, but I was willing to learn. And I had some really great mentorship and leadership coming from Jeff Murray, because at the time, Jeff Murray was in Red Deer as well. He was overseeing Z98.9 and a good chunk of some areas of rural Alberta, but his specialty is classic rock. They needed somebody who could be more focused on country. And that was where my role fit in, right? When I got to Leduc, I realized that I didn't just love country music. I was like weirdly obsessed with it. And so I love the format so much. So even at my time on Leduc, I started to get really involved with the country music scene. So I got myself on the board for, at what the time was the ACMA, it's now called the CMAB, but that's the Music Association for Country Music in Alberta. So I was on that board, and I was, doing a lot of the liaisons with the labels and the artists and all that kind of stuff when they would come through, and just getting to know people in that whole community. And so they needed that in Red Deer because, again, CKGY was such a juggernaut of a radio station in the country community. And so that's where I kind of kept growing that side too, right? So I still can't believe they let me do that, but here we are.
In just a second, more with Jen, including tips and tricks on how to build an entire radio network. How does a music meeting happen across 4 time zones? And why is Alberta the home of country in Canada? The song you're hearing right now is by Megan Patrick. It's called Cool About It. And it's up for a 2022 CCMA award. And I know what you're thinking. Why are you playing this, Matt? Well, it's because I recorded a podcast episode with Megan about how she became a member of the Buffalo Bills Mafia. And I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a listen. It's up on the episode page at soundoffpodcast.com, where you can also get a transcript of this episode.
Transcription for the Sound Off podcast is powered by Podin. Your podcast is an SEO goldmine. We help you to dig out. Start your free trial now at podin.io.
The Sound Off Podcast with Matt Kundle.
So you're 24 years old. I have wine that's older than that. And you're program director in Red Deer. I mean, there's got to be some people who look side-eyed at you.
Oh, yeah. I 100% experienced that. And why wouldn't they? Like, why wouldn't you look at that and go, this is interesting. Does this kid, because I was a literal kid, know what they're doing? And in some ways, no, I probably didn't know what I was doing, but I could at least figure it out. That's, I guess, one skill set that I have is I'm a really strong problem solver and learner. I like to learn. And so if I didn't know how to do something or how to handle a situation, I would go and figure it out. And again, that's where people like Jeff and Steve and stuff worked with me on some mentorship stuff, right? On like, how do you work with talent? How do you make your station better from the music side as well? Stuff I didn't know in Music Master. And how do you write proper imaging? I mean, I was doing all that in Leduc for sure, but my skill set wasn't, and I mean, I'm still growing and learning, improving on that, but my skill set definitely wasn't quite at that A level at that point. So working with them and, just learning and all of that, there were some challenging times where I really had to kind of prove myself by action to show people that I knew what the hell I was doing. And even if I didn't know what I was doing, I had to act like I knew what I was doing because I would lose their confidence. And so that was a lot of work. And there were definitely some moments where I would close, my door and be like, I don't think I handled that situation right. And then reflect on it and figure out how I was going to do it next time and come back and make sure that my team still had faith in what I was doing. But I think I can speak from experience now with the crew that I have worked with, like people like Randy Chase or Vinny Taylor, those type of announcers where they would say, yeah, she knows what she's doing. And there was a lot of ups and downs with that, for sure.
How much country is too country in Alberta, or is there such a thing?
I mean, I'm really biased, Matt, so I don't think there is too much country. But like Alberta is, if you look at the country, like Alberta is the country province. There's no doubt about that. There's a reason why the CCMAs have kept going back there. There's a reason why the Calgary Stampede is what it is. There's a reason why when Garth Brooks comes out of retirement, plays one show anywhere, he picks the centennial celebration of the Calgary Stampede. Like, it is a giant country market, rodeos, it's lifestyle, right? Like, up and down Alberta, whether it's a good thing or bad thing, sometimes on the redneck side, is the country province of Canada. And I don't know if there is such a thing as too country. I mean, the interesting thing about country is we've gone through these eras, and it happened in the 90s, but we've gone through these areas of polarization, right? Because country music, is it country music, right? Like, that's the big question that so many people challenge on. When you look at acts like Florida Georgia Line, Sam Hunt, the snap tracks, the pop influences, they're getting played on CHR and, Hot AC radio. So is country really country? I mean, I think it is. At the end of the day, Nashville is the epicenter of country music. And if what they're doing is what they're doing, it's country, right? Like, I think people sometimes get so focused on what country is, though, and how it has to have that traditional sound and whatnot. country's kind of become like AC. You know, the AC format doesn't really kind of exist anymore. And it's like country is the one that people will flock to. It's just easy listening and it's not like twangy. That's the biggest complaint you always get, right? Oh, I don't like country music. It's twangy.
Yeah, so rock can be anybody with a guitar and country can be anybody with a hat at times.
Yeah, at this point, yeah.
Because I do recall, you know, the discussion around in the country circles around Taylor Swift. And so what are the conversations today where will you get a call to say, maybe you shouldn't be playing that?
So, I mean, it's drastically changed, you know, kind of even from the Taylor Swift era. I think, obviously, right now, one of the hot things that a lot of people are watching is the Netflix documentary of Shania Twain. So we all know that Shania is arguably one of, if not the biggest influence for how country music sound changed in the 90s to the early 2000s, which then Taylor Swift picked up. And it was that pop sound. What you'll notice the shift of Taylor was she had her last song, I think it was Red, like the last song that kind of had success. Like she had some other songs that she tried to release to country radio and they didn't do as great because they really had at that time leaned so pop. But Red was an interesting one because if you go back and listen, it's got that red, like it had some really interesting production cadences to it that at that time, you know, it's funny because I look forward now and I'm like, well, that song would sound absolutely fine. It wouldn't really stick out like a sore thumb, but it kind of did at that time. And that's where she was considered to have leaned to pop for country radio, right? But in terms of today, where I've questioned it, you know, like we've had a few Sam Hunt songs come through in a music meeting where we've had discussions and gone, oh man, like, are we going to play this? Like, are we going to have an issue with this? And Florida Georgia Line was the same. I mean, that Meant to Be song that they did was very different. And, you know, you look at some of the duets that have come out recently we've got country artists paired with rap artists, paired with pop artists, where the song is getting crossover and stuff. I mean, you've got artists like Maren Morris, who goes and releases the biggest song on country radio for the year, The Bones, but also has just come off a song called The Middle, which we didn't play that, but she's getting airplay all over top 40 hot AC radio. So at this point, if I'm honest, Matt, I don't really know where the line is because I get sent a song and go, okay, well, this, I mean, really poppy, like tons of snap tracks and stuff in it. And we'll put it on the air and I'm waiting for complaints and phone calls and they don't come. So I don't know if the country audience at this point is just kind of accepted that that's a part of the music, and that could very well be it. I mean, I'm a country fan, and some of these things don't bother me. I'm going to listen to these songs and I'm going to love them. But then I get a song sent to me via Chris Stapleton, and it's super traditional, and I'm in love with it. One of my favorite songs last year was Jordan Davis and Luke Bryan did a duet called Buy Dirt. And if you look at that lyrically, it's got some very traditional themes and stuff to it, right down to putting a church collection donation in. Like, that's very traditional country type music. Or Cody Johnson. He had one of the biggest songs of the year, and that song comes on and it's so traditional country, and I love it. And the fans love it, but at the same time, they're okay with a really poppy Thomas Rhett song. So I think it's just the listener has changed, and it's more so that they just like music that, I think it's a mood thing. I think, you know, they're listening to songs, and some of these songs will make them cry, and then some of the songs will make them think of their kids growing up, and then some of these songs will make them want to crank it up real loud and dance. And I don't think they're not as worried as they were 20 years ago about, is this actually country music?
Tell me about getting the Real Country Network together, because I look at it now and all the stations that you oversee. How?
So the Real Country Network was interesting. That was the first network that we built as a company. So it came across Jeff Murray and mine's desk, and it was this idea to match these stations, make them a little bit more, you know, I guess in line, so the scheduling music would be less of a task, and from a sonic perspective, they would sound more in line. And then from like an imaging perspective, you could produce, you know, one batch of imaging, tag with different frequencies, right? So it made sense, like from a business perspective and from a, you know, even just an execution perspective. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. But we'd never done a network before. I had worked with two stations that we kind of had linked with Stony Plain and Leduc. We had shared voice tracks on those radio stations, so had a real basic understanding of what we needed to do. But that was, again, Jeff Murray and I, let's get on the phone to Music Master and let's figure out how to do this, because we're going to match voice tracks and we're going to sync these radio stations and they're going to play the same music basically at the same time. And we're going to have these as one brand, right? And then from there, okay, we got to get logos, we got to get gear ordered. Like, it's the little things, right? Like right down to building signage. And you're like, oh yeah, we got to change that sign. You know, there's a little thing that somebody's printed in the door that has a Mountain Radio logo on it with the hours that the front door is open. And we got to change like little things like that, right? Because as we all know, every time you flip a logo, it's like, whoa. So, you know, that became interesting because, you know, there was no pushback in any sense. It was how do we do this? Like, we're about to kind of create something cool. And at the time, we only did it for the real country stations. So it was just basically the province of Alberta. It just made more sense on how to program all of rural Alberta, because you're right. Like, if you look at our company, we've got a ton of stations over in the east, a few in Ontario, and then you get to the province of Alberta and it's like, whoa, like we're everywhere. Like, Stingray has a lot of small market stations in rural Alberta. And on the real country side, if you count Red Deer, there's 10 of them. So we have 10 real country stations. So what we did is we left Red Deer to its own devices because it made sense. It's a rated market. It's a bigger market. It's the juggernaut. We're still going to rebrand it, which was interesting and a little terrifying. And, you know, at the time we weren't sure, is this the right choice? Like, do we take this heritage brand and this juggernaut of radio station, do we give it a new name? And it made sense because of the things we were just talking about with the music style of country. That logo looked old. Like, it looked like an older logo. And as we know in this competitive world, like, you got to stay kind of fresh and hip to be relevant. And we weren't sure the music we were playing, because of how the style of country music had changed, like, it didn't match. Like, you'd play a pop Thomas Rhett song and then you'd look at the station logo and it was like that older horse and KG country. And it didn't feel like it fit. And so we decided that we would spice it up. We'd give it a new logo. And one thing, Matt, if you go and look at the logo, this is my favorite part about it. On Real Country, the province of Alberta is hidden in the logo. I'm looking at it now. It's the bottom of the A. The province of Alberta is actually right in that logo. And that was kind of a fun thing that we did. That, again, I don't know if anybody notices it, but we notice it and think it's super cool. And why we chose Real was the idea to still kind of fit with Alberta is a country market. It's real country. You got rodeos. You got people who, you know, their kids go out and they mutton bust on the weekend. And then you've got people slinging hay and you've got people who just drive that QE2 stretch all day long. And so they're real country. Like, their lifestyle is real country. And that's why we went with that for that province, right? So it took us about 6 months and we figured it all out, how to link the stations, how to link the music masters, the voice tracks, the music categories, all this kind of stuff, and hit go and then flash forward and we have a lot of networks. We have the Boom Network and, you know, the Hot Network, and we have now New and Real Country are actually one distinct network, right? So they're all one network. At one point, they were kind of a little bit separated, but we realized there was we shared voice tracks, and we were able to acquire amazing talent like Paul McGuire and wanted him on all of our properties. So we were able to link those brands, and it's been a ride, that's for sure.
Well, one of the things I know you didn't have to worry about was talent, because it was Randy and Vinny. I mean, Randy, there's a pro, and you got a veteran in Vinny, and I guess that was the easy part of the rollout.
And I mean, I know you've talked with Randy, and her and Vinny are I say this with so much love, they're the weirdest thing that's ever come together. And what I mean by that is we weren't sure how it was going to go. You have two very different people lifestyle-wise, and they are like best friends. Like, they love each other so much, and it's so awesome. But they're so different. Like, we have always run stuff on the air that's like peanut butter and jelly, salt and pepper. Like, they're so opposite. Vinny will go home from the show and sit on his deck in a bathrobe and have a smoke. And that's, and yell at his neighbors. Like, that's just who he is. And Randy is everybody's friend, right? She'll end up at a supermarket and she's talking to like 18 people in the aisle about their day and probably sharing a lot of information that they don't want to know. She's an open book, but you put them together and they just have this great dynamic, and they've made each other better broadcasters. Like, Vinny is a stronger broadcaster, and his storytelling and his vulnerability is so much stronger because he has Randy, who he's watched just be this open book and willing to share her ups and downs. Like, she shared so much on the air, challenges her and her husband are going through, challenges with trying to have kids, like all this stuff. And Vinny hears that, and then he's willing to open up about his story, which is also very interesting. And you get them together and they're just like two best friends on the radio that maybe like without this crazy business would have no business being friends. So they made that super easy. And, that was part of the reason why it came to the decision we were going to syndicate them, because the content was so strong. And that was that crazy conversation where we went, is this content only country? And it wasn't. It was lifestyle driven. It was stories. It was, the things that we want to share. And so we made the decision to put them on Boom too, which was probably, from an outsider's perspective, a little bit nuts.
I think back to when I worked with Randy in Montreal back in the early 2000s, and she said she was moving to Edmonton. And I said, okay, here's some good places to live. And here are 5 friends. And I left the names. And of course, this is before Facebook and all that stuff. And then the next thing you know, my friend Phil calls me up and goes, hey, I'm with your friend Randy. We're having a great time. We're drinking. And I was joking, but they all got together and they're still friends to this day. So
that sounds like Randy.
Tell me about the music meetings. Because an ad on Real Country, that's a big deal. That's a lot of stations. That's a lot of spins. That's a lot of reporting.
If you get an ad with our stations, like you're on all 20 properties now between Real Country and New Country. So it is. It's big. 5 of those are reporting. Well, 6 if you count BDS. And then the rest are still secondary spins where if you're an artist, your music is getting into markets where you can go play shows and all this kind of stuff. So it is a big deal, which is why we take them pretty seriously because we know that the impact that can have. And so we do actually a lot of different chains and groups now, committee meetings, if you want to call them that, right? It's our whole group, some key players from each kind of area of the country and stations. So obviously I'm on the calls. We have somebody like Jackie Ray Greening, who is a bit of a legend in the country music world. Up in Edmonton, she sits on the calls. Shiloh out in Moncton, who, again, is super well connected, in the country world on the music side too. And then some up and comers that are, they want to get there. They love country music and they want to grow, in their radio career and they want to learn more about the music side. And so they come in as well. And so, that weekly meeting, depending on holidays, sick schedule, you're looking anywhere from 6 to 8, 10 people that are involved in that, which can feel like a lot of cooks in the kitchen. But at the same time, you get different perspectives, right? Like, for example, when we are looking at a song, sometimes we'll throw it out to the women in the group. We target women and go, okay, if we're looking at this song from a female perspective, what's the message? Is this a song that women are going to relate to and love? And so there's that perspective that we look at. I mean, obviously, like everybody else too, you're looking at data and you're looking at, relevancy of the artist and you're looking at the song and production and all of those factors. But I love that we've got such a diverse group because some of our group is really numbers focused, which you need. And then some of our group is really heart and soul focused, if that makes sense. They just love the format and they can hear the song in the playlist. Because if we just programmed only based off of numbers, I don't think your radio station, I don't know if it would sound that great. I think you'd get a lot of the same songs kind of running back to back. I think, cadence, tempo, I think all of that, I don't think you would get a nice playlist. And so I think there's lots of other things you have to take into consideration, which is sometimes where the heart comes in and the texture and going, this song, let's take a chance on this one because if in our playlist, which right now is really mid-tempo, male, let's say maybe a little bit love, wimpy type songs, this song is going to come in like a rocket and it's going to break up that cadence so the listener doesn't just think they're listening to the same song over and over and over again. It's going to punch you in the face. This is going to sound really good in the mix. Or this ballad from this female artist is insane. It's so well structured and written. And yeah, it's a ballad, but holy crap, right? It's going to hit the feels all over the place. And so that's kind of the balance of our meetings is we've got this group that's focused on that side and the number side, and you put them together and you get a really great combination and different perspectives. Different age groups are in that meeting, different skill set levels, different knowledge of the industries in that meeting. And I think when you put all those people together, it creates a really nice dynamic. Obviously there's some days where we add a song and I'm like, it's not my choice and whatnot, but I'm going to respect in my role, I'm going to respect the committee because that's the decision that we've made. And I've been wrong before. So.
Oh, listen, I'm the guy who didn't add Kid Rock Ba with the Ba to the Bear in Edmonton. So been there, done that, in and amongst a few others as well. So.
Yeah, totally.
Does everybody come to the meeting with the songs listened, or do you listen together?
Yeah, we don't listen together. A big part of that is actually just the one, we're all remote. Like, it's not like we're in a room and it's easy. And as we know, like, sharing audio on this space is not always the easiest. And sometimes it cuts out or it comes through. And if you don't share your screen right, then we're not actually getting the audio. So we've kind of made it, we have a list that gets sent out and updated as new music comes through and whatnot. And then it's everybody's job to, when you come into that meeting, you've got the notes. And that's Shiloh's role a little bit. So Shiloh will help curate that. He'll come to the meeting with some suggestions on moves as well. And then we discuss through them. And sometimes we go with what he suggests. And sometimes we throw it out the kitchen, we throw it out the window and we start from scratch. But that's kind of, our structure is listen to the songs. We'll chat. If somebody brings up a song that not everybody's familiar, because that happens, and we got to, listen to it or come back to it, unless it's a superstar song, which is, that might happen if somebody releases a song on a Monday morning before a meeting, which is rare. But for the most part, it's you come in prepared.
So I had a phone call from Warren Kopnick at Sony, and he asked me for a technical idea, because the entire radio industry comes to me, and record industry too. Whenever they have a technical question, they're calling me. And he brought up an interesting question, which is, how can I play music for music directors and program directors and give them a taste of what the song is going to be like? And at the time, it was a Chainsmokers song, but it is an issue. You just can't play this stuff over Zoom, or we're doing now just Squadcast, because it's just not the same thing. It's got to come barreling out of speakers.
Well, we tease Warren all the time because he must have learned a few tricks from you, although he's not as polished as you. Because I've had many a call with Warren over the last 2 years in pandemic where he freezes or he doesn't have his sound turned on right. But he looks great. He's got the headphones, he's got the mic. I'm like, Warren, you can start your own show here. Do you want a job?
Oh, he got it worked up. He's got a whole studio thing going now. So he's upped his game when it comes to, doing his calls and whatnot. And speaking of reps and record reps, how do you balance the time to take their calls? Because you're obviously one of the top ones when it comes to making a phone call for country.
There's a few of them that we have scheduled. I have scheduled weekly calls or bi-weekly calls. So we've actually built it into calendars. So, and that is for the most part, some of your major players on the country scene I'll spend some time chatting with them every single week, which is great. We use that time to catch up on some stuff, chat about how the meeting went this week and if their song didn't get in, why. And then, what's coming. So they'll give me a little update. And then, of course, if we have any ideas we want to do on the country format for our company in terms of activation, contesting, whatever it is, or specialty programming, I can chat through on that side with them. Otherwise, for the remainder, I've been fortunate to build some pretty good relationships with these folks over the years, having worked so much in the format. And so if they need a call or to chat about something, it's a quick text or an email. And we'll schedule a time, or sometimes I just get a call of the blue. And if I've got time, I'll make the time. I'll answer the call. But for the most part, a lot of the stuff is scheduled calls. It's been interesting in the pandemic though, because there's been a few people who have forgotten that I don't live in Alberta anymore. I live in British Columbia. So sometimes I'll get a call and I'm up early anyways, but I'll get a call at 7 a.m, or I'll get a call. Somebody will call my old Red Deer number and they can't get a hold of me. And I'm like, yeah, because I'm not there. I'm not sitting at that desk anymore. So maybe try this number instead. But for the most part, and that's just because nobody's done radio tours, nobody's been around, and we haven't seen each other for 2 years. So everybody forgets what that's like, right? So
I missed that tweet. I didn't know that you'd moved to BC.
I do. Yeah, I live in BC. So basically what kind of happened was during the pandemic, we made some shifts. So I was living in Red Deer, and in 2019, I took over the role to oversee Red Deer, rural Alberta, and BC from afar. So I was a regional program director for basically, I guess, those stations in the West. And then kind of in the midst of the pandemic, my role shifted and they wanted a little bit more boots on the ground in the BC interior. They needed some strong leadership skills here to help grow these stations. And so I moved out to Kamloops, which is where I'm living now, to oversee the 3 operations in Kamloops and then 2 in Kelowna. So operations manager for BC Interior, and then kind of shifted my role with country. So took on a more official capacity as the brand and content leader for the country format. So basically overseeing everything on our country properties, assisting in marketing, promotions, the national music stuff, national shows like Paul and other, syndication like Casey's, and some of our, regional voice trackers like Susie Burge in Alberta and stuff like that.
Who is your favorite record rep and why is it Laura Fraser?
Oh my God, I love Laura Fraser. That's a really good one. Can I say I love everybody but Warren Kopnick?
Yes, absolutely you can.
I'll say I love everybody but Warren Kopnick. I actually have more recent blackmail for Warren Kopnick that I've saved in my phone because I went to an event. He brought some folks in to see a new country artist named Nate Smith, and the Tim and the Glory Boys were there, and they have a song called Float. And Warren might have ended up on the stage in his bathing suit and snorkel gear, dancing around. So I made sure to capture that so that I've got some blackmail.
My only experience with country music in the last 10 years has been I met Aaron Goodvin in the hallways of the office that you're in right now. And Megan Patrick was on a podcast that I did, and we didn't really talk about much country music. We talked about the Buffalo Bills.
That sounds about right. Okay. I will say that the country music format, if you have not worked the country music format, you don't get it. And then you work the country music format and you go, oh my God, I just love this format. And I love the people in the format. And how do I keep working in this format? Which is why you get legends in this format who work the format for so many bajillion years and know the format inside and out. And it's because it's literally, I call it the country music family, the country music community, word it however you want. Yes. Do we have our own 800 bajillion award shows? Yes. Do we have lots of different associations? Yes. But that's what creates all this community. Like it's unreal. The friendships and relationships that I've been able to build over the years are just because of this little world that is country music. And then you throw in the fact that in Canada, we have our own version of it. So the Canadian country music group. And it's like a giant family. Like I'll be in Calgary in September for the CCMA Awards and, Country Music Week. And I can't wait to hug every single person there.
You answered my next question.
What is something that is exclusive to the country radio format that is not country music?
Yeah, it's the community. You don't know it until you're in it. And it's kind of hard to explain, but like associations where I go and I spend time working with new artists and how do you get radio airplay and educating them on the radio side of stuff, but also watching them perform and grow and you get to witness that. Like, Brett Kissel is, for so many people, it's funny. Like I was just listening to an interview that Paul McGuire did with Dean Brody. And he talked about Brett in the interview where he said he was at, he thinks it was the Junos or maybe it was the CCMAs. And he was on the red carpet. And at the time, Paul was working at CMT. And Brett walked by him and said, "Hi, Mr. McGuire. I'm Brett Kissel. I'm 15 years old. And one day you're going to interview me on this red carpet." And I mean, Paul's interviewed him about 100 times on red carpets, right? So it's this own little culture and world that it's kind of special.
Quick question. How many stations do you program?
Well, I've got the 5 in BC Interior and then oversee the 20 that we've got for all of our country stations.
And how did you ever manage to do this on a Friday afternoon when there's about 800 logs due?
I mean, well, that's part of the advantage of how we've built our systems, which is great. And we got really good people. But yeah, as we all know, Fridays are maybe my least favorite day of the week, which is weird.
Jen, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for asking me.
The Sound Off podcast is written and hosted by Matt Kundle. Produced by Evan Serminski. Social media by Courtney Krebsbach. Another great creation from the Sound Off Media Company. There's always more at soundoffpodcast.com.